Sefer Lametet Melachot. We want to get to the Melachot, the 39 Melachot, and we're in the first volume.
This is like the high school.
No, I need to go to command to get my coupon.
I'll check it out, okay?
Also, I was thinking of you, I want to refrigerator on mine. My refrigerator died.
Okay.
Okay, we're just going to start the recording now.
Said you can get it cheaper online.
Okay.
So we ordered it for me, and it came.
Shmuel.
But the light won't go off on Shabbat. Because it's all digital. Oh.
Hi. Okay. So we were doing a series of introductions in order to get into what the Melachos are. We opened with a discussion from Chazal and our great sages and tzaddikim about the benefits of keeping Shabbos and the hazards of not. And then we started, last time we met, we started talking about the author chose to start with dispelling common misconceptions about what malacha is before we talk about what it actually is. So we've been talking about what malacha isn't, and we brought a bunch of different examples of behaviors that somebody could theoretically do on Shabbos, which are totally, they're within the realm of the dioraisas on Shabbos, and yet they are not at all. Meaning, if people think that malacha refers to work, as in going to work, we demonstrated how a person can manage his business almost exactly like during the week and not violate any dioraisas. So that's not meaning malacha doesn't mean not going to work. If not going to work is a feature of Shabbos, it's not because it's a malacha. Okay, so we're up to misconception number 2 that the author wants to dispel, that work means toil. When God said, don't work on the Sabbath, he didn't say, don't go lugging that lumber around. Maybe he meant that too, but that's not what the malachos are. Let's see. Okay, so we're on page 11 for all of you that have the book. B, misconception number 2, work means toil. Some people think of work as strenuous physical exertion, such as moving heavy furniture, etc. To them, not working on Shabbos means abstaining from strenuous activity in favor of leisurely ones. However, this perception is also false. For example, a person can perform back-breaking labor if it gives him great joy. No, it doesn't say that. For example, a person can perform back-breaking labor, and yet he may not be doing any malacha. He can't do it on Shabbos for other reasons, but that is not a malacha. Carrying heavy furniture up a flight of stairs on Shabbos is not a malacha, but it is rabbinically prohibited. By contrast, a simple relaxing activity can be a malacha midiraita. For example, strolling on a city street with some change in one's pocket is the malacha diraisa of hotza'ah. Hotza'ah means taking out from one domain to the other. We're going to get to it, we're going to talk about it. Okay? Similarly, light indoor activities such as filleting fish or opening the mail, according to some poskim, or combing one's hair, are each a malacha midiraita. We'll talk about why. Okay, so work does not mean toil. Misconception number 3, working means use of modern technology. That's a misconception, obviously, that is only of late. People who are unfamiliar with Shabbos observance are often of the mistaken belief that Shabbos involves a ban on the use of modern appliances and technology, such as driving an automobile, using electricity, a telephone, and so on, even if you don't live in Dutch Pennsylvania. While the outward appearance of Shabbos might suggest this to the casual observer, the fact is, modern living is not a contradiction at all to the laws of Shabbos. It is perfectly permissible to make full use of modern technology on Shabbos within the parameters of halacha. For example, there is nothing wrong with benefiting from electric lights, appliances, air conditioners, heaters, etc., as long as one does not switch them on or off, or in any other way activate or adjust them during Shabbos. To benefit from their use is not a problem. Note, the use of timers on Shabbos in some cases can be problematic. This will be discussed in greater detail in the Malacha of Mavir. So I just want to point out that in using this book, going through this book more than once or twice, there are certain features about it and the way the author wrote that in some ways takes getting used to, I felt, for me, but at the same time has a benefit. So there's 2 things that I would suggest at this point that we try to bear through. One is that even though he's setting things out in a way that he wants to organize and build concepts, the nature of Torah in general and any specific sugya in Torah is like a web. So you go in one place and it's a hub, and you kind of have to talk about everything around it. So you're always talking about things kind of beyond the scope. So he's not very concise or clear in terms of not introducing or elaborating through other concepts that confuse things. Meaning he's mentioning a whole bunch of things now that we don't know what they are to compare and contrast. I'm just noting that. At least that's how I felt for myself. The second thing that he does is he can bring the same thing over and over again at different places just because it may be relevant or because it touches upon it from different angles, which is great because even though at some point, sometimes, it seems like not superfluous, but it's repetition over and over again, and you'll start, so it's interesting. Certain halachot come up all the time, or referencing certain malachot, different aspects of them. So that's a feature of the book. Okay. So he'll tell you right now, he's just trying to describe to us what a malacha is, and while he mentions something, he feels he has to tell you in there, by the way, don't do this, or this is a mistake, so it's that kind of multi-tiered conversation. I found it difficult in the book. It now becomes clear that malacha is not simply work in the colloquial sense, but rather a specific type of labor defined by Torah law. Right, we're going to create, it's got its own special definition. Precisely what these particular labors are and how they can be understood will be further explained in section 3. Okay. The heavy cost of ignorance. My grandmother had a speech for me like that. Studying the laws of Shabbos is a very great mitzvah. Conversely, ignorance and lack of appreciation for the treasure of Shabbos and its laws exacts a high price in many ways. The following are some of the ill consequences brought on because of ignorance: unnecessary transgression, excessive stringencies, and confusing contradictions. The meanings and extent of these unfortunate effects will be further elaborated in the paragraphs below. Unnecessary transgression. Regrettably, not knowing the underlying principles of each individual malacha can lead to Shabbos desecration that is completely unnecessary. While in the process of performing simple Shabbos chores and tasks, one can easily be led to do a malacha without even sensing that his action is a serious transgression. On the other hand, by understanding the malachos, one can usually accomplish his Shabbos chores permissibly and with little or no inconvenience, as many malachot are subject to various conditions and exemptions. Thus, a particular act might be a malacha under one set of conditions, yet perfectly permissible under others. The following examples highlight this important and far-reaching rule. Okay, so there's a malacha called dash, which means threshing. So malachot, just to tell you, there's something that we call an av malacha, and there are toldot. So there are 39 malachot, which are derived from different labors that were done to erect and the Mishkan, and for the Mishkan to be active. All right, and each malacha has a title, which is the essential malacha, and that's called the av malacha, the original, the paradigm, the archetype of the malacha. And then there are many subcategories which are extensions of that, which we call toldot. Okay, so the malacha of dash, which is threshing, becomes then defined by extraction, because we meaning the act of dash is when you want to separate the chaff and the wheat, and that's seen when we want to turn that into a concept that we're going to apply into terms of toldot. It's a form of extraction. So, for example, squeezing a lemon then becomes problematic because it's like threshing, meaning what you want is the inside. There's no way to remove it without some sort of act that separates the two, and therefore squeezing a lemon into tea is prohibited because of mifarek, which means to extract, which is a tolda of dash, which is threshing. Yet, fresh lemon juice may be extracted permissibly, according to most poskim, by squeezing the lemon juice into a spoon of sugar or onto a sugar cube and then mixing it with the tea. So basically, he's using this as an example to point out that sometimes where you have a prohibition, there's usually a hack or some way meaning once you understand why it's problematic, sometimes there's a way of getting your objective done by avoiding the issue. And we're not going to explain why over here, but that's why it's important to have, you have to have an understanding, first of all, to know that a certain malacha has a tolda. You have to know that squeezing a lemon is a problem. And then you have to know that there's a way to squeeze a lemon that's not problematic. Okay, number 2, borer. Borer is the malacha of sorting. Okay, peeling eggs on Shabbat morning to serve for the third meal is prohibited because of borer, because peeling the shell of an egg constitutes the removal of undesired matter from desired matter. Yet eggs may be peeled permissibly by peeling them just before the meal. So when it comes to food preparation, anything that has to do with food on Shabbos and Yom Tov usually has its own laws. So even though there's always, even though sorting is a problem, and sorting is a problem even when it comes to food, there are certain things when it comes to food preparation that you can avoid the issues of sorting. So if you do it a certain way, it's okay. But he didn't go into it over here, what that is. Okay, so now bishul is cooking. Bishul is, so placing a slice of lemon and a tea bag into a glass, and then adding hot water from a kettle is bishul. It's prohibited, you're cooking. Yet the same tea can be made permissibly, according to the Igrot Moshe, according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, by simply reversing the order. Pouring the water into a glass, and then pouring the water into a second glass, and only then adding the tea bag, lemon, etc. This is because you'll see that there's a whole bunch of rules that govern cooking. There are all these kinds of laws of the spiritual physics of cooking, meaning, there's something called a kli rishon, and a kli sheni, and a kli shlishi, a first vessel, a second vessel, and a third vessel. There's something called esh when it's on the fire itself. So each level, each vessel has different statuses. Certain things you can, it's not considered cooking if it's in a second vessel, certain things if it's in a third vessel. Those are all the laws we'll learn, God willing, when it comes to bishul. But this is another example of you can do it, you just got to know how. So he says over here, this is due to the principle of kli sheni, a second vessel, and kli shlishi, a third vessel. He notes here that hot liquids cannot halachically be considered, cannot cause cooking once placed into a third vessel. Whatever it does in terms of physics, halachically we do not consider that cooking. Now, this is another point that I just want to make, that there's a transition here that a person goes through when learning Hilchot Shabbos, that it's very, very important to note that we kind of divorce the physical realities of our physical experiences and the halachic definitions of these concepts. So for example, it's not empirical and it's not physical what we call cooking. It's defined by halacha. And if Chazal say it's not considered cooking in a third vessel, it doesn't matter what's happening. So I mean, this is something that we can discuss as it comes up to wrap your head around, but we're talking about halachic realities. And in order to get used to that kind of thinking, you have to note that there's a little bit, it's not empirical. It doesn't matter, it's a reality of halacha. Okay. Regarding methods of resolving the additional question of tzovea, which is dyeing, you're not allowed to change colors, right, of something on Shabbat. And the question is, well, are you changing the color of milk when you pour in coffee or chocolate syrup, right? So he says, hey, there's other issues. There's always issues, you got to know. Even if you think you know, you should be paranoid. There are things you don't know. There are things you don't know, you don't know. No, so he says he's going to talk about it later. You should know there's something you don't know, and I'm going to talk about it later. Okay. Tochen is grinding. Okay, so there's a whole body within the 39 melachot. There's actually subsections. Subsections like sidura de pat, the order of making bread. So for example, you have 10 melachot that are just derived from the process of bread making, which starts from plowing the field and planting the seed all the way to not just harvesting, but all the different refinements you have to do till that flour ultimately becomes a dough and then is baked. So from plowing to cooking, which is really baking, all those melachot are going to be melachot of what we call the order of bread. Okay? So one of those is tochen, which is grinding. Because in order to make the flour, once you have the kernels that are meaning you've separated the chaff, you've separated whatever you have, right? Now you want to make the flour, so you're going to grind. So because God said that because you needed to grind kernels to make the Mishkan, now you can't mash a banana or a potato. Okay? So mashing a banana or a potato with a fork is the malacha of toche. Yet the same bananas can be mashed permissibly for a child by using the handle of a fork just before eating. Meaning if you do a shinoi, you do it differently than you normally do, and it's immediately before eating, it's not preparation that's separate from the eating, but it's the act of eating, that's okay.
What
If
is
it's
the
for a
difference?
child.
What is the difference between the preparation and immediate
Okay,
eating?
so I'll tell you, we're going to talk about it later, but when it comes to borer, which is sorting, and tochen, which is grinding, there are 3 conditions that have to be present in order for it to not be considered tochen or borer. So now, in terms of the rabbinic prohibitions of Shabbos, Chazal never made any prohibitions when it comes to eating. Not food preparation, but eating. The act of eating, Chazal were not, if you got to eat, you got to eat. And so sometimes children and the elderly and the infirm require different things than the regular person, but it's considered their act of eating. So now, I'm just going to give you a sneak peek. When it comes to both tochen and borer, there are 3 conditions. If it is miyad, immediately before the act of eating, if it is biyad, it is done through the hand or something that's seen as an extension of your hand and not a specialized tool that's used for such a thing. And if it's done with a shinoi, that would take it out of the realms, the prohibitions of the rabbinic prohibitions, and allow one to eat. That's the short version. But I'm saying we're gonna deal with all that. Okay? How are we doing for time?
I think 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, so now, mechabeh is extinguishing a flame. Pouring water directly onto a tablecloth that suddenly caught fire is a sort. It's forbidden under mechabeh. Yet the same flames could be put out permissibly by wetting the cloth near the flames. As opposed to putting out the fire, setting up a trap for the fire, right, with colored wine or soda. Got to be smart, because if you use clear water and it's a tablecloth, maybe that's considered scouring and maybe you're cleaning the tablecloth. So if you do it with something that is not cleaning the tablecloth or actually makes the tablecloth dirty, right, then you avoid the issue. You have to become like you have to be a ninja. You gotta, not only do you have to have the muscle memory to act on halacha fast, but you have to be mentally competent. So that's a great example of, you think, what? There's a problem. The Torah told me I can't put out a fire on Shabbos. I can't be mechabeh, right? That's mechabeh. But I can lay a trap for the water by not directly pouring the water on the eish. I could put a ring around waiting for the fire to contain it. And yet, I have to be concerned that it should not be scouring or cleaning milabem, to whiten or scour the tablecloth. So I should use colored liquids. Okay. It's not necessarily important at this point to remember the details, but we're getting the sense that there's a way to do things and a way not. We have to understand why it's so important to know the technicalities of what is forbidden and why, and know the ways around it so we can function. Okay. The aforementioned examples illustrate the fine line that often divides between permissible and prohibited activities, and how an obscure condition can make the vital difference. Note, the conditions and exemptions of the melachot will be discussed in greater detail in Section 2 and Section 3. Those of you that have a book already, at your leisure, you can, take a peek. Okay, we talked about excessive stringencies. We know that the less we know, the more we're forced to avoid engagement with the gray areas. And consequently, a lot of people prefer to take on stringencies. And more than that, there are many people that just because they don't know, their way of performing things is much more stringent than necessary or that it should be, which causes problems. The verse says, "Darchea darchei noam v'chon nesivosea shalom." Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are paths of peace. Excessive stringencies. Simple restraint from all activities to avoid Shabbos transgression is also not a viable solution to the problem of ignorance of halacha. Obviously, one cannot be expected to simply sit in a corner with hands folded during the entire Shabbos day, nor is one permitted to resort to this approach, because you have to have fun. Shabbos is meant to be sweet and pleasant in every way. Moreover, it must be remembered that kavod Shabbat, the honor of Shabbos, and oneg Shabbat, the enjoyment of Shabbos, are essential elements in proper Shabbos observance. Not just observance, that should be the experience. It's not just your responsibility, it's what we want you to have. One who does not enjoy the Shabbos and honor the Shabbos does not properly fulfill the mitzvah. And like Hanan is saying, you're not properly fulfilling the mitzvah, but you're not in Shabbos. Therefore, even the most sincere and meticulous pious individual cannot be spared some form of Shabbos desecration if his knowledge of the halachot is inadequate. So we're all, please God, we're going to become experts. Invariably faced with an endless stream of shilos, halacha queries about what is and what is not allowed on Shabbos, such persons are apt to impose upon themselves excessive and unnecessary restrictions. Such conduct would unfairly and incorrectly deny them the beauty and pleasantness of Shabbos and would also be a detraction from its honor. It is possible to see how this can occur with the following melachot. Okay, so we mentioned tochen, grinding. Chopping or pulverizing a substance is the malacha of tochen and is prohibited on Shabbos. However, not all substances are subject to this malacha. Foods that do not grow from the ground, like meat, fish, or cheese, are exempt. Consequently, it is perfectly permissible to chop tuna fish, liver, cheese, etc., with a fork, spoon, knife, etc., as long as it's not a grater. Remember, we just mentioned that tochen is problematic specifically when you use a kli, a vessel that was designed for such. Additionally, previously ground substances are also not subject to the malach of tochen. If it had been ground once already, and since then, for some reason, it clumped up, and you're not grinding it to a level that was finer than originally. If you're just grinding it back to its original form, then it's not considered tochen. Therefore, it's perfectly permissible to crush matzah, cookies, aspirin, and other medicine tablets on Shabbos, in the event that they're permitted. Because we have to talk about when you can take your pills and when you can't take your pills, and what pills you can take and what pills you can't.
Only the fun ones.
Sorry?
Only the fun ones.
That's right. Happy pills. Right. M&Ms. No, dried mud, bricks, and earthenware are also excluded. Okay, dash. We mentioned dash before, threshing and squeezing the lemon is extraction. So extracting juice, we said, is mifarek, which is a tolda of dash, and it is asur, it's prohibited. However, some forms of squeezing are permitted. For example, extracting excess oil from a latke or kugel, or undesired brine or gravy from herring or meat is permitted. So you'd be able to strain, the tuna fish oil or water from the can, as long as you didn't do it in a way that you're actually straining it with a device. Like you'd be able to pour it out or extract it. We'll see how. But sometimes you're allowed. Okay, confusing contradictions. Serious effort is required for the study of Shabbos. You got to get a book. A poor grasp of the underlying concepts of the malachot of Shabbos will ultimately leave one lost in a labyrinth of confusion and contradictions, even one who may wish to acquire knowledge about its laws. The following are malacha paradoxes that serve to illustrate this point. You gentlemen like a good paradox? Mm-hmm. Choresh. Choresh is plowing, and practically that means rubbing the soil. Well, no, I take that back. We're going to compare and contrast the act of rubbing the soil and versus walking on the soil. Rubbing out saliva on the soil with one's shoe is choresh. It's plowing, and it's forbidden. Yet walking on the same soft soil, thereby causing a depression, is permitted. Zorea. Zorea means to plant. And we learn out that it's not just the act of planting, but anything that prepares the earth in a way to accept the seed or to make it more viable and suitable for planting. That's the malacha of zorea. Pouring water on growing grass is the malacha of zorea, sowing. Yet raising the sukkah covering, let's say you have a sukkah and you have the covering on the sukkah, a rain tarp, and it rained. And your sukkah is on a patio, and around the patio is your backyard, your grass. Now, when you remove your shlach is a fancy Yiddish word for your sukkah covering, your rain covering. When you remove it, all that water is going to come down, and eventually it's going to dump on the grass. So, pouring water on growing grass is the malach of zorea, yet raising the sukkah covering just after heavy rains would be permitted, even though the rainwater will fall on the grass. Now, this is not a hard and fast rule. We have to discuss the conditions. But generally speaking, you see how, hey, I'm not allowed, but wait a second, this situation, this is allowed. And if I knew one and not the other, or if I saw someone do one and not the other, But here, he thinks that this is a contradiction. Yes?
You're allowed to walk on grass on Shabbat?
Well, you're allowed to walk on soil on Shabbat, even if it makes an impression.
What?
You may walk on soft, pliable soil,
Right.
even if it makes an impression.
How about grass?
Maybe we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want after class, if you need a halacha, but okay. So yet you can't rub something out into the dirt.
Right.
Okay. Ma'amar. Ma'amar means you got your fruit trees and your ripe fruit have fallen from the tree, and you want to collect them all in a bag, and you want to bring them to your house. You have your orchard outside, and you want to bring it to your estate, right? I mean, to your home, on your plantation. So the act of gathering them is called ma'amer. So gathering fruits in the garden versus fruits scattered on the floor. Collecting 2 or more fruits near their trees is the malacha of ma'amer. Yet gathering a basket of oranges that spilled on the kitchen floor is mutar. So it's not the act of gathering per se, it's the act of the gathering, which is a harvest, which is from the outside and bringing it to the inside. But on the face of it, it would seem like a contradiction before we knew any of the facts. Okay. Lush.
Can I just go into that for 1 second?
Please.
Is there a certain tkufa, a period of time in which those 2 have to be collected within, or 2 throughout Shabbos, 2 within Tefillah Dibur?
That is an excellent question. So those kinds of questions, I will say, since we're only raising these to illustrate, to make a point, and we're not really discussing them to know the halacha, I'm not going to go into it here, but those are all things that we have to wrestle with when we do ma'amer, and we should, okay? Okay, so now, lush. Lush is the act of making dough. That's when you take the dry flour and the water, and you put it together and you knead it. So you're making something, and the question, there's going to be a machloket, is it what you're doing, meaning lush is really the kneading, and the mixing is what creates the thing that you need, or is the problem when they combine this? We're going to say, practically speaking, it's the second that they combine, the liquid and the solids combine. Okay, mixing flour and water or cereal powder with milk to produce a thick mixture is lush, although lush literally means kneading. We're using the word kneading to refer to the stage before kneading of making a dough, okay? Yet mixing vegetables in a dressing to form a thick coleslaw salad. You have one thing, which is a mixture of a solid and a liquid, like how do you determine, right? Or drink powders to flavor a drink. You have a powder mix and you add a liquid. Those are mutar. So we got to figure out what lush is. Milabain is to scour, to clean, to whiten something. So that, as an extension of that, the wetting a fabric, you have a stain or a spot, or maybe you just want to reinvigorate the fabric by, there's sometimes, and we're going to talk about this, just the act of wetting a fabric freshens it up. So that's forbidden on Shabbos. So wetting fabric versus wiping one's hands on a towel. How come I can't get my pant leg wet, but I can wipe my hands on a towel? Wetting a fabric is the malacha of milabain. Here he's calling it cleansing. Yet drying one's wet hands on a towel is mutar. I think there's some obvious theories that could pop up. But okay. Tzovea, coloring. So here he says, out of tzovea, coloring water in a crystal jar versus coloring drinks. Adding food coloring to a crystal jar containing water for aesthetic purposes. You want to freshen things up. You're making a birthday party on Shabbos, and you want to put blue food coloring into the water because it's a Tzfat party, right? That's a problem because that's out of aesthetic consideration. Literally what you want is the color out of it. However, adding tea or coffee or drink powder to a glass of water is perfectly fine, even though the water will become colored as a result. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more. Kosher. Kosher is the act of tying a knot. So forming any tight knot on Shabbos is the malacha of kosher. We'll define all the different halachas of what makes a knot, what doesn't make a knot, when you can do it, when you can't do it, okay? But generally speaking, you can't tie a tight knot, a secure knot, yet tying shoes, even securely, is permissible. Why is it you can tie your shoes, but you can't tie a rope, or maybe even, there are only certain ways that you could tie the garbage before you take it out. Korea, tearing. Tearing a sheet of paper on Shabbos is the act of korea. Yet ripping open thin paper or the cellophane packaging on foods is permitted. I can rip open a bag of potato chips provided that I'm not erasing any letters. That's another consideration. But I'm not allowed to rip, rip open maybe I can't rip toilet paper or a piece of paper. Okay. Mochek. Mochek means to erase or to undo a letter, to break the form of a letter, to destroy a letter. So cutting through a letter or a character on a food wrapper, thereby splitting the character, is erasing. Yet cutting between the letters of a word is permitted. I mean, breaking up the meaning of symbols or glyphs, physical symbols, is not a problem. But destroying the actual form is a problem. You understand that distinction?
Mm-hmm.
Right? A letter itself, I can't destroy the letter. But if I separate where there is no letter, just because I undo the meaning of the image, and there no longer is that word, that's not called erasing. That's not halachic erasing, okay? Yet cutting between the letters of word is permitted, even though the word combination is thereby broken. Okay. And number 10, our last example, hotza'a. Hotza'a means removal or exiting, or taking something out from one domain to the other. Okay? Carrying a button versus wearing a button. Okay? Walking on a city street while carrying a button in one's pocket, an unattached button, a loose button, is hotza'a. Now, I just want to note here, we're not used to the laws of hotza'a at all because we don't practice them because we choose to live in a place where there's an erev and presumably it's okay. So this is a little bit unfamiliar to people, and people don't understand that it's okay when there's an erev. I'm saying these things, and don't take this the wrong way. We're talking about a situation where you can't carry. You cannot carry on Shabbat. We get away with this today because we have halachic ways for creating a shared space, that it's all one space that we can carry within. But we have to learn the halachot anyway, because we can't take an erev for granted. And when there is no erev or tzurat petach, then you can't have things you can't carry things on you. So what is considered carrying on your person? What's considered actually part of your clothing that you're not carrying, you're wearing it. Okay? So walking on a city street while carrying a button in one's pocket is the malacha of transferring, of hotzah. Yet wearing the jacket with a button attached is just all right. The apparent contradictions cited above are in fact not contradictions at all. Surprise. They are all easily reconciled with an adequate understanding of their halachic concepts. As explained earlier, much effort is required for the study of Shabbos. However, the effort will reap rich benefits. Understanding the nature of the malachos will dispel the confusion that can surround the halachot of Shabbat and will ultimately help one to achieve the highest standards of Shabbos observance while sacrificing none of its enjoyment and great rewards.
Shkach.